my topic for today. To start off with, I think this is a topic that's no stranger to any one of us. If this is the first time you're hearing about people talking about ransomware, then we should be pretty concerned. So on that note itself, I think we are here to help you combat ransomware as the topic speaks. And one key word that I like to highlight over here is about resiliency. In our grounds, data resiliency, data as your biggest asset, and how do we protect or have your data resiliency when you're combating the ransomware? So a couple of things that I'll be running through, which could be familiar to you, familiar in the good sense that you're aware, you've got all the information covered, as well as resolution. Ransomware is about constant alert, is about constant monitoring of a situation. As you know, the bad actors out there are on the constant looking out for tools that's easily available to attack your environment, as well as us from a protection standpoint, from a resiliency standpoint. We are also looking out for tools that can help you defend against the ransomware. Right, so this is my agenda to start out with a quick update on what are the sources of impact that is coming in from the bad actors or the ransomware, the threat actors out there. So we'll take a look at the recent survey. I'll say the most recent survey from last year, and then we'll go into a framework. Why do I want to start off with a framework? There are multiple frameworks that you can follow. If you do not know where to start off with, I recommend NIST Cybersecurity framework. I use this a lot to advise my customers on how you can leverage on what we call capabilities as a framework. So I'll touch on a bit more details on that cybersecurity framework with regards to from a data protection standpoint or a data resilience standpoint. And then a real life use case. I'll share with you one of the use case from our customers whereby he shared, unfortunately, a ransomware attacks over the weekend. Kind of pretty common that ransomware will attack over the weekend, right? There's good reason for that, right? Because there are less people and then you are less alert on the weekends. And on Monday, when it comes in, it crippled his network, it crippled his file service and some of the critical system. And how does it tackle that, right? What is the learnings from that? So we'll talk about that. And last but not least, it wouldn't complete to end up with a end-to-end solution with Veeam and ExaGrid on modernizing your data protection to cater for the latest trend of the ransomware attack. All right, with that said, let's get into some details to substantiate what I'm going to talk about over here. So if you look at some observed ransomware sources, there are multiples that you can see over there. And if you compare a survey that we have done last year, why do I pick Q3 last year? Because last year was a time whereby there are an increase of 7 times attack of ransomware or cyber threat as a totality, right? Due to the reason of the distributed workforce. I don't think it's less this year. It's still the same thing this year, and it's going to get more, right? So that's the reason why we need to be on constant alert when it comes to a ransomware attacks or the sources. Where are they coming from, right? So if you look at this, there are 2 pointers that I like to highlight over here. In 2018, sorry, I just moved forward a bit too fast. In 2018, hang on, in 2018, you can see that the attack from a ransomware is more from spam, which is very common. Users unaware, click on the emails, and then you got the attack. And remote access is just a mere 5%. If you look at just last year, Q3, and on that chart over there, which states as remote desktop RDP, it has increased to 21%. Of course, spam emails is still the larger percentage of that is 60%. So that's something that we have to constantly observe. Things like, because of the distributed workforce, things like RDP to your desktop or through a jump box, it might not necessarily be that RDP connection. It could be a jump box that's connecting your endpoints or insecure endpoints into your service. It creates a backdoor, a loopholes for the bad actors out there, right? And imagine that. I would just like to stress that as quite a lot of us are coming back to the office. I'm in the office right now doing this presentation. And when this laptop that has been working in the distributed in the home office for 1.5 years or so, and when those laptops come back into your office environment, what sort of impact will you be looking at? So that's something to take note of, right? Because it's easy to control your laptops and desktop within your office environment when they're out there for a long time, and when they come back, there could be an influx of loopholes that the bad actors will be looking at. All right, so that's just kind of quick note, and on that note, on the survey, Veeam survey, Hofware, Verizon, almost on a similar type of ransomware attack that we're looking at. Okay, so let's take a look at this NIST, right? National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. So following a framework just give you a good start. And I'd just like to go into details, not too much on the NIST. You can go to the website and take a look at that. I just want to run through from a capabilities as a framework standpoint. So the first part about identifying your data, which is really important, is going through what we call data tagging, data locality, and mapping it into different departments that you have from business view standpoint. So identifying your data, knowing the criticality of data, or what we call data profiling, is really important at the start, at the beginning of this cycle of capabilities as a framework. And then it goes into our ever famous, right, the ultimate backup rules. I'm going to talk about more details in depth too. 32110. A mouthful of numbers over there, but I'll explain in clear details what does 32110 means. Obviously, there's a backend of immutable storage. So we have heard about probably worm devices on the legacy disk and probably even to the tape, right? So this is happening in a newer technology of object storage on immutable storage, or what ExaGrid has offered from the immutability standpoint. So we do not fight, again, I just want to stress upon, we do not fight the ransomware alone. With this the trust strategies that we are having, right, we are going to make sure every single host that we need to patch has to be patched proactively, right? Then it comes to monitoring and alerts. As a way of ongoing tracking, you need to know what are the anomalies in the network, what are anomalies in the port scanning, what are anomalies even in the backup system, right? So the detection piece comes into the picture, and then orchestration and automation part, dynamic documentation when it comes to responding into threat like this. So this is also pretty much important from a responsive standpoint. It's not about when, right? It's not about what if, right? It's when this is going to happen, right? So we need to have proactive as well as reactive measure when it comes to these capabilities as a framework. And last but not least is on secure restore. So I wouldn't stress, I would stress a lot more on the last line of defense that we are talking about over here, which is on the recovery part of things, the type of recovery, the type of test before even doing the recovery to get back your system online. And then we understand that cyber threat is on double threat or even triple threat, right? It encrypts your data, it exfiltrates your data, and then nowadays they re-attack your environment if you didn't patch it up well, right? So this is the part whereby the recovery comes into a picture, and recoveries will help you with the triple threat extortion from ransomware, right? So let's take a look at a real-life use case. So weekend attack, as I mentioned earlier on briefly, the administrator came into the on the Monday morning, and then realized that a complete loss of on-premises data and infrastructure, as well as even the backup data somehow has been compromised. So the good part is that they actually back up into what we call the 321, a different media into a object storage that helps them and save them by not paying the ransom and getting their data recovered 100%, right? So I also like to highlight on the 100% recovery is not just about data recovery, it's also on the time to recover, okay? So, and I'll spend slightly more times in a bit more time into the detail of this. There are multiple ways that these customers of ours can go into the learnings of being attacked by ransomware, right? So it goes into that advanced threat protection. So a couple of recommendations that he mentioned will be on real-time visibility, right? Context, data awareness, using your existing tools that you have. You're running on Windows Defenders, Defender ATP tools. If you're running, for example, on VMware environments as a production environment, Carbon Black Predictive Security Cloud, this could be something that you leverage on. Just a few examples, but you would definitely have some form of ATP that's implemented in your environment. Leverage on that, enhance on it if required. And there are security templates, right? And security templates, for example, like the Center for Internet Security or the Microsoft Security Compatibility Toolkits, if you do have Windows environment. And security templates is just for the start of where you are embarking into this journey of protection, right? And it's not the end. Of course, there's fine-tuning required. It's just give you the baseline, right? And we spoke about that, the RDP, right? Remote desktop. Locking down sessions or don't leave any sessions wide open for a long period of time. You could be using IPsec, secure connection, or determine when should be the RDP coming in. Locking down a just-in-time access. Don't open that up for a regular basis, like the whole day and so on. So this is something that you should be looking upon. Remote access, we know that all of us, quite a lot of us are working from home right now. So the distributed access has created a lot of pressures for our IT guys, right? Who suddenly, since last year, has to cater for people that are working remotely. So apart from that, providing that accessibility at the same time, making sure that they lock down certain aspects, like internet access or limiting just specific access to certain ports, checking, enhancing, scrutinizing the firewalls as well as access point to get into your intranet or your environment, right? As we talk about the jumpstart server earlier on. And training across the board, right? Technology does play a huge part, but training, education, letting users, not to scare users, but let them know and be aware, so that. But then again, we still know that unfortunately things still happen. So that's where you got to take note of what redundancy do we have. There are a couple of things at the bottom over there, like dedicated fabrics. Get up. There's this thought process of getting up from a single domain meaning that, for example, if you have a backup network, create a backup network, and the backup network could be further subdivided into communication network and data transfer network, a specific protocol, or that separate network of connecting Veeam with ExaGrid. So the data transfer network will be, to a certain aspects, air gap, right? Obviously, air gap, one of the best air gap will be to the tape, right? But obviously, tape does have the recovery aspects, which is not fast enough when it comes to ransomware protection or recovery, right? So getting that could be some help in terms of data fabric. Multi-factor authentication is probably a regular deployment for everyone. And yep, I kind of briefly touch on that zero trust model, right? We are going to the mode whereby every single component has to be scrutinized. Don't assume that I have the safest network, I have the safest system, I have the safest OS hardening, locking down any form of attacks, right? It has to be that overly suspicious and zero trust model in any aspects. Okay. So moving forward, as mentioned, it wouldn't be complete to provide you with a resolution from Veeam and ExaGrid. And this is the modern data protection journey that I'm looking at and we are talking about, right? So to start off with a couple of unique value proposition that brings ExaGrid and Veeam together from a solution standpoint. I'll start from the top right, right? So top left, data resiliency, since this is the main topic that the keyword that I stressed upon earlier on, right? So with Veeam and ExaGrid tiered backup storage, we are able to protect all the workloads from a virtual machine perspective, from a cloud workloads perspective, from your legacy physical workloads perspective, and every of a single workloads. At the same time, there's a guarantee of recovery, which does go into the impact of a ransomware recovery. All right, so data resiliency is something that should be in your environment right now, and it should be well protected. Then we move on to data dexterity. So that's where modernizing your data protection comes into the picture, right? So Veeam with ExaGrid has a uniquely integrated solution whereby we have a Veeam incorporated data mover in the ExaGrid appliances, right? With that, it helps improve the communication being secure because it's a secure communication between Veeam protocol into the ExaGrid appliances. But adding on to that, right? How do we use, I just want to extend the use case of a backup solution, right? We need to be able to high utilize the backup solution, not just for recovery. So for a moment there, take that kind of recovery out of the picture for now, but to reuse your trapped data. What I mean by trapped data over here is backup data, because everyone will think about backup data is more for recovery, but you can use it more than just backup recovery. Of course, and even into the world of business analytics, driving productivity, your backup administrator will be able to tell your data analytic teams to say that I give you my backup pool of data. You come inside, take a look, do your trending, and get some business insight out of the backup data. Right? So production data and backup data, I'm referring to the backup data over here as data dexterity. And data security as a holistic aspects of things. Veeam with ExaGrid retention time lock. I think this is key. We have gone through quite a lot of evolution. We have gone through multiple iterations of integrating and enhancing with ExaGrid appliances, and with the ExaGrid retention time lock, this is the key capabilities that you should be looking at and implementing in protection against ransomware, increase your data accessibility without performance being impacted, as well as from a compliance and governance standpoint, right? So that is the solution that we are looking at. So just a quick run through on the data security challenges. Supporting frequent regulation compliance, no running away from compliance, whether it be a regional compliance, a country, or even a company policies, right? Protecting the data from malicious attack. This is what we have been talking about for the last probably 10, 15, 20 minutes. And then identifying alert that monitoring aspects and tracking aspects try to be as proactive as possible, but nonetheless, even if it's reactive, the last line of defense will act accordingly to what you need and effectively restore the data as mentioned. So downtime, reducing the downtime as per cyber threat attack and recovering the data is more so for a ransomware recovery. Why is that so, right? Because you're way against time. And of course, the ransomware bad actors will be telling you, I'll only give you this amount of time. You got to get back to me. If not, I'll expose the data, right? So your time to recovery is really important. So it's not just about immutability and protection of data, but also the effect of how fast can I get this data from, example, an ExaGrid appliance and get it back into the production environment. Okay. So here we go with ExaGrid. There's a reliability as well as a secure protection at the same time with a fast recovery. Okay, so Veeam and ExaGrid has been well known to have a best dedupe and compression savings from a storage standpoint. At the same time, it doesn't compensate on our unique offerings of instant recovery. So we are able to save space at the same time, have a fast recovery. That's where we started off the good technology integration, and then with the enhanced mode of immutable backups with ExaGrid retention time lock, that helps even further from a security standpoint, right? So, okay, and the best practice that I talked about earlier on, right? So it's about 3-2-1. I think 3-2-1 is pretty common out there. 3 different copies of backup with 2 different medias. I believe you should be doing that at least, right? 3 copies and 2 different medias, and 1 has to be offsite if that caters for your regulations or offsite disaster recovery practice. And what Veeam and ExaGrid has offered over here is on the one of the copies has to be offline, air gap, or immutable. Okay, that's where the ExaGrid appliance comes into the picture, working together with Veeam to cater for that, as well as the 0. The 0 means that it has to be 0 error, because we talk about recovery, right? We have time is the essence to do the recovery, right? It has to be 0 error. And I talked about the triple threat extortion earlier on ransomware, right? Before the recovery, your backup data has to be clean before you recover back into your production environment. or else there will be a re-attack coming in, right? So that's pretty common too. So 3, 2, 1, 1, 0. And moving forward, just to give you a better idea from a diagram perspective that we have over here. So integrated data mover, as mentioned earlier on, fast ingestion of data into, on the right-hand side, okay, you have your production environment on the left-hand side, your VM infrastructure, and then going through the Veeam backup service, and then sitting it on the ExaGrid dedupe appliances. So you write to ExaGrid with a Veeam protocol, that's a secure protocol, some form of air-gap protocol that we're communicating, as well as Veeam to a CIS as comparison, and then ingesting it into 30% faster from a backup window standpoint, keeping within your backup windows. At the same time, recovery is also one key aspects that we spoke about earlier on, right? So performing that full backup, the incremental backup is 6 times faster than Veeam to this with the ExaGrid appliances coming in. And obviously, if you are looking into the legacy or traditional dedupe appliances, they do not have that flexibility of putting it into a landing or a performance zone for fast recovery, and then cost savings from a storage standpoint into a dedupe zone as what ExaGrid dedupe appliances is offering over here, right? So that works really well. And of course, with that data mover piece, that is that unique integration point whereby the data mover is residing in the ExaGrid dedupe appliances that helps in processing internally, very close onto the incremental, the full backup files. So it helps in meeting your backup windows with the explosion of data that you have. It helps in recovering your data. It helps in protecting you from a cyber threat with a immutability standpoint, right? So end-to-end, unlimited scalability, as I mentioned, growth of data, and how do I scale accordingly, right? We're talking about terabytes and petabytes of data information, which is a big asset that we are trying to protect over here. And the unlimited scale-up backup repository, as the diagram depicts over here, ExaGrid is scaling out system. We do have our software scale-out that can work very well with ExaGrid, with job automation, future-proof scalability, capacity load balancing to distribute the workloads out, superior performance, as you see over there, that caters for a 2 petabyte full backup system. Definitely Graham will explore and go into more details on that, and fault tolerance, right? So end-to-end scale-up backup repository from Veeam and ExaGrid. All right, in a quick summary, protecting your backup from attack is what we are focusing on. There are a couple of ways that you've seen over there. One of the key things to focus, NIST framework to start off with, as well as moving on into the 3, 2, 1 and 1, 0 best practices, right? So I see over there, proactively on the alert, detecting ransomware, detecting on anomalies on the network, detecting on anomalies on the port, as well as into your backup data. Ensure ransomware-free backups. Backups will not be, their ransomware will sit there dormant for a while before they are activated. So those which, if they get across into the backup, how do I ensure that when I recover, I can do a scan and I clear this ransomware before I recover it into the production data? And last but not least, restoration is a key step, which is virus or malware or any threat free, right? So yep, if you look at it, combined solution in Veeam, our product set is Veeam Availability Suite, which is Veeam Backup and Replication. With Veeam One, together with ExaGrid, we provide these 5 capabilities, and we'll be glad to go through some of the details or even showcase to you how immutable backup works, data lab, secure restore, sure backup, and ransomware. These are the differentiator that we have combining these 2 technology together. All right, I think I probably exceeded a bit of time. I hope this is useful from Veeam standpoint. And from here, I'll pass it over to Graham to touch on more on the ExaGrid part. Graham.
Thank you very much, Raymond. And you're exactly to time, so that was wonderful. So I'm just going to share my screen a moment. I think I should be able to do that quickly. And start the presentation. Just bear with me a second. For some reason, my PowerPoint has hung. Give me a second.
Graham, while you're sharing, guys, if you have any questions at all, forget to mention it. There's definitely a chat box on WebEx over there. So put your question over there, and and Nick is also helping out to answer the question. We'll keep our eyes on that, and then any question at all, right? Please share, or your learnings, anything at all. So this is more for sharing. Yep.
Good, good. So you should see my screen now. Thank you very much, Raymond. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you're based. This is Graham Woods from ExaGrid, and it certainly is a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you about ExaGrid and Veeam's integration during the session today. So I'm going to cover a few things during today's session. I will briefly explain or introduce ExaGrid as a company, but that'll only be very brief. Explain a little bit about how it's an exceptional fit for Veeam, and also go through some of the protection layers that we can offer to a customer, because the storage where you keep your backups is something that's extremely important to protect, especially in the event of a ransomware attack. So I will run through how we protect the data, and we'll talk about the immutability, the security features, and so on as we go through the presentation. So just briefly, ExaGrid and Veeam are two different companies, clearly, but with very, very tight links between the two. Raymond's already explained to you how there's integration between the two with the Veeam data mover, but it goes further than that, it goes deeper than that. We don't just have an integration, we also have a very close working relationship. So we don't just do sessions like this together, we cross-train each other, support organizations as an example. But as we go through the presentation today, I hope one thing that you'll take away from it is to understand not just how we integrate, but how we complement each other with two products that are very synergistic together. Just briefly, in terms of our customer base, we are the only vendor that offers the approach that we offer, which is a tiered backup storage approach. We do have an extremely referenceable customer base, over 330 public references out of many thousands of customers, and over half of those are specific ExaGrid-Veeam case studies. So in addition to hearing what myself and Raymond are covering today, on our website, you can see way over 100 customers talking about how successful their deployment of Veeam and ExaGrid has been. So I'd encourage you to take a look at some of those after the session today, if you have the time. So before we go into the ExaGrid technology, I think it's important to first of all just outline the options available in the market for customers, or the options that they can consider to utilize as a storage platform with Veeam. There are pretty much two options. There's low-cost disk from a variety of different vendors in the market, and there's inline deduplication appliances. And there are pros and cons in most technology choices. And as you can see listed on the slide here, the advantages of low-cost disk really revolve around performance. They offer speed of backup and speed of restore, but there are some disadvantages, especially in today's compliance-driven world, where organizations are forced to lengthen or have a maximum retention, which means they keep their backups for longer. And of course, if you've just got disk with limited deduplication, then you start to use a lot of disk for the longer term retention, and it can become costly. So organizations that do have larger data volumes and also, in addition, longer retention, do sometimes look at deduplication appliances, ultimately to lower the disk usage for backup purposes as you keep many, many copies of data. But the disadvantage, or disadvantages, I should say, of deduplication appliances is they will slow down backups and restores because of the deduplication algorithm. They're not so scalable, and you can end up in a situation where you are vulnerable to ransomware because there's no inbuilt ransomware protection features or recovery features. And one thing also worth mentioning, if you look at Veeam's best practices for deduplication appliances, the recommendation is that you effectively stage data to disk first and then send it to the deduplication appliance. So Veeam's features around backup and restore and the performance characteristics of the two are not affected by the fact deduplication gets in the way of backup and restore. So what is ExaGrid's approach? Why is it different? And understanding the architecture leads nicely into explaining how we achieve immutability and ransomware recovery capabilities. So we have a tiered backup approach. It's tiered storage. There are two tiers of storage in the ExaGrid system. There's a landing zone, a performance tier, and then secondarily, the second tier is a retention tier where we keep the deduplicated data. So if you think about the concepts from the previous slide where we have the low-cost disk and the deduplication appliance, we're effectively bringing the best of both into one single platform. The landing zone is there for fast backups and restores. So once the backups are finished writing, we can still recover the data efficiently from the landing zone. But the lower disk usage in the retention tier via our aggressive deduplication algorithm is one of the reasons that we can lower the cost considerably for organizations with longer term retention. We also have some other benefits around scalability. We have the ransomware recovery option, which I'll talk about in a moment. But this is an approach that nobody else has adopted in the market today. And this is an approach that really does add value to data protection. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail shortly. So let's first of all look at backup performance, then we'll look at restore performance, and then we'll talk about ransomware recovery and scalability. So one of the benefits of our architecture is the fact that we've got the landing zone. Backups can write directly into the landing zone, so you get high-speed backup. There's no deduplication algorithm affecting the ingest performance. But the deduplication works adaptively. So we're always, or we're in the most case, deduplicating and ingesting at the same time. So our offsite copies are happening in parallel. But one of the things I won't go into detail about on this presentation, but one I just mentioned briefly, if you look at this architectural approach and the performance it can achieve, we would be able to ingest any volume of data from single-digit terabytes to multiple petabytes of data in 6 hours or less. That's a combination of the landing zone architecture, but also our scalability with our scale-out architecture. So in terms of backup performance, unmatched in the industry when it comes to raw performance of ingest. But whilst backup performance is important, in today's world, especially if there has been a ransomware event, restore performance is critical. We would be able to restore from one of two places, depending on the nature of a restore, either the landing zone or the retention zone. The landing zone is network facing, I should add, and that is where most of the restores will come from, because the landing zone holds the most recent backups. And the most recent backup is typically what you'd want to recover from. If you want to go back further to the previous week or the previous month, then we do have to recover from the retention repository, but most restores will come from that landing zone. But it's not just about the restore performance. It was interesting, of course, as Raymond was talking, he went through the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. The last one, before the 0, had two elements to it. The need for immutability, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the need, if you didn't have immutability, the need for an offline copy, an air-gapped copy, ultimately tape. So you're in a situation with ExaGrid and Veeam, you don't have to choose one or the other, you can actually do both. And just as a real-world example, we had a customer actually based in the UK doing a proof of concept, an evaluation recently, and they were already using Veeam and they were already doing tape copies, but they found that the performance of their current storage meant the tape copies were starting on a Monday and finishing on a Friday, which was unacceptable to them. We put the ExaGrid solution in place and we dramatically reduced those tape copy processes in performance because it's coming from the landing zone, it's in Veeam's native format, and it happens very, very quickly. And of course, with the landing zone, you can also boot virtual machines very quickly. And I've got examples in some of the case studies that we have where customers boot multi-terabyte virtual machines in seconds to single-digit minutes. So that performance is important. But as I say, the network-facing landing zone is where we initially communicate with Veeam, but it's the retention repository, the retention tier, that then leads us towards the immutability and the ability to recover in the event of a ransomware attack. So it is where we keep the deduplicated data. And as it says here, it's non-network facing. There is no route to the deduplicated data, the long-term retention directly from the network. So it is a virtual air gap, if I describe it that way, from the network and from the backup software. It does offer low-cost long-term storage, but importantly, the data that we store in the retention tier is immutable. And by definition, what immutability means is once the data has been written, it cannot be changed or modified. Now, one thing I find some organizations, I guess, ignore, if I describe it that way, is immutability is not good enough for protection in the event of a ransomware attack. It needs to go further than that. And what I mean by that is immutability says you can't change or modify data, but you also need to be able to protect data from deletion. Now, if you look at a typical backup environment, data is deleted from the backup storage pretty much every day. As soon as a customer's retention has been met, then the old backups will expire after new backups come in. So you're constantly deleting data once retention is met. Now, in the event of a ransomware attack, it's sometimes, or almost certainly the case now, that the attacker could be in the network for some considerable time, planning the nature of how the attack will evolve. And almost certainly won't be the case that they'll just encrypt the primary storage. They'll try and find the backups first, and ideally, from their perspective, delete them so that when the attack is initiated, customer's got no backups to restore from, primary storage has been encrypted, and the customer's in an impossible situation at that point. So it does go further than immutability. There also needs to be the ability to protect from deletion of data. And that's what we do with our retention time lock functionality. If you take a situation as I just described it, primary storage has been encrypted, the backup data has been deleted, and in that sort of event, customers are in a very precarious position. What we would be able to do with our tiered air gap is once the customers realize an event has taken place, our retention time lock functionality would kick into play. And what retention time lock does is it delays all deletes from the backup application from Veeam for a predefined period of time. So just as an example, with a 10-day retention time lock setting, after an event had taken place, the data would be held, that the deletions would be held for that period of 10 days. So customers can then put the system into a recover mode and be able to recover their data. Just to explain that graphically, we've got primary storage, we've got Veeam, and then we've got the two tiers of ExaGrid. We've got the performance tier and the retention tier. Ransomware sends an instruction to delete the data. Now, because the backup application, because Veeam has to have a catalog synchronized with the storage, the data would be deleted from the performance tier. But at that point, retention time lock would kick in, and we would ignore those deletes for the predefined period of time in the user interface, and you would be able to recover efficiently back to the primary storage. And there's some other functionality maybe we'll talk about a little bit later in conjunction with ExaGrid and Veeam that also helps as part of that process. I'll come to that shortly. So in terms of the 5 steps to recover in the event of an attack from a storage perspective, ExaGrid has a recover mode. You put the system into that recover mode. Working with our support organization, you would identify a known good time to be able to recover from, plan the restore from that point in time, and then the restore would take place directly from the ExaGrid retention zone to the primary storage. Very straightforward, very easy. It's something that is easily demonstratable in our user interface if anybody would like to see the process via a demo after this webinar. Immutability is important, as we've discussed. Delay deletes is important, also, as we've discussed. But there are many other security features built into the ExaGrid system. And I won't go through all of these one by one with time in mind, but we have the ability to encrypt the data when it's sat at rest. Sometimes people have their storage in a third-party data center. It's not their own data center. So having the ability to have the data encrypted at rest is important. And that's something that we do without a performance impact. We do hardware-based encryption, so that doesn't affect the performance of either backup or recovery. We have one encryption, two-factor authentication in the product. There's role-based access control. So if you don't want to use Active Directory, you can use local users or a combination of the two to add an additional layer of security. Secure protocol is important. And as Raymond's already mentioned, and I'll talk about it in more detail shortly, the ability to communicate from software to hardware or software to storage in a protocol that nothing else understands does add another layer of protection into the environment. And as you can see here, there are many other security features that ExaGrid offers to an organization. So we've talked about the ability to have backup performance, the restore performance characteristics of ExaGrid. We've talked about the security features. Before we talk about the Veeam integration in more detail, I'm just going to briefly explain our scalability. Because the ability to do the backups is important, clearly, but you need to be able to do them within a backup window. And we have a full scale-out architecture with global deduplication between all appliances. So that allows us to scale not just capacity, but also compute at the same time. And compute is important because with deduplication, there's a lot of compute-intensive operations taking place, albeit with ExaGrid in a way that doesn't affect the backup window. So with an ExaGrid system, you can start with one single unit, and there's a number of different size units that we have in the product range, and scale out to a maximum of 32 appliances in a single scale-out system, which takes us to well over 2 petabytes of landing space. In total, 5.4 petabytes of usable space in a single system, which you can grow as you need to when you need to. It's something that is nice and straightforward. We can also put different generations of ExaGrid appliance into the same scale-out system. So we have various customers which have systems that are a number of years old with brand new machines today that weren't even on the roadmap a number of years ago. So it gives a level of investment protection too. And hopefully with time in mind, there'll be a little bit of time at the end of the presentation, and I'll explain some of the the economic benefits in our scale-out architecture, which we'll come to shortly. Disaster recovery is important. We can work with a number of DR scenarios. I've already mentioned the ability to do tape copies efficiently from an ExaGrid landing zone, but we can also have cloud-based options, private cloud between 2 data centers, hybrid cloud, and even public cloud, where we can send the data today to AWS and in the future to Azure, which will be sometime next year. And there's extra features around our DR scenarios. There's bandwidth throttling, WAN encryption. If it's a DR site with no data to back up, we can be more efficient on capacity by using landing zone as retention space, which reduces the cost of the DR copy. But again, to follow the 32110 rule, as Raymond described it, this further adds to the capability to meet those requirements. So let's talk about the Veeam ExaGrid integration in a bit more detail. Certainly Raymond did a great job of doing the introduction. I'm just going to reinforce, I think, some of the messages that he's already given you regarding the integration, because it is a level of integration that is unmatched in the industry and has been for some considerable time. So as we've already mentioned, we have the Veeam data mover running inside the ExaGrid system. That gives 2 benefits, or 2 primary benefits. First of all, as I've mentioned, it's a secure protocol, so only Veeam can communicate with us. If a ransomware attack managed to compromise just a standard Windows server in the environment that's not running Veeam, it would not be able to even see the ExaGrid storage. So there's a security element of running the data mover. But there's also a performance element in the data mover too. The data mover is a very efficient protocol. And we had a test run by the Enterprise Strategy Group some time ago, which measured the difference between the standard general purpose protocol CIFS and running the data mover. And we see for backup and restore a 30% performance improvement. So there's certainly a performance improvement in having the data mover. In addition, many of you may be familiar with Veeam. Veeam has the ability to do deduplication. It's a very efficient deduplication for performance. But what you'll find is with some vendors, you can't choose whether you want to do the deduplication in the hardware or the software. They force you to do it one way or the other. ExaGrid is different. Our deduplication algorithm is very aggressive, but it's also very efficient in that you can have a Veeam setup where Veeam compression and Veeam deduplication is switched on, and providing the compression is set to dedupe friendly, then we will be able to ingest the deduplicated data and further deduplicate it. So that gives you a benefit because you're sending less data over the network. It will improve the backup performance, and ExaGrid will further deduplicate the data once we've got it in the landing zone. So that gives the benefit of storage efficiency. We've obviously talked about the performance characteristics of ExaGrid, so I won't go that into any more detail. But one thing I will just add is don't underestimate the importance and the capability of being able to boot virtual machines directly from the landing zone when you really do need to recover fast. That's an element that allows you to do so. And the fact that we have the landing zone lends itself to things like sure backup. You can perform those types of tasks in a timely manner too. One thing Raymond also touched on, I just mentioned briefly, we can also do synthetic full backups with the data mover. Typically, if you wanted to do a synthetic full backup, you'd have to move the data from the storage and read it to the server to be able to work out what the new full should look like, and then you write it back down. That task with an ExaGrid is entirely contained in the ExaGrid system, so we're very efficient in creating synthetic full backups, whereby you can minimize your backup window by only taking incrementals, but at the same time minimize the restore performance by having the ability to boot a virtual machine that's now got a real full copy in the landing zone. And I won't talk about the scale-out capability on this page. I'll just move on to the next slide and explain how our scale-out architecture works very, very well with Veeam's scale-out backup repositories. So as I mentioned just earlier, we do have scale-out architecture with global deduplication. Veeam has scale-out backup repositories. So with an ExaGrid deployment of multiple appliances, you can quite simply configure a Veeam extent on each appliance, add it to Veeam Sober, and then you get completely automated job management from Veeam's perspective. So Veeam decides which data goes to which machine. Doesn't matter if it goes to different machines, different days, that's absolutely fine. It'll load balance the capacity and give a level of resiliency, redundancy, because if there is a failure of a path between Veeam and ExaGrid, it'll just redirect data to another machine, capacity permitting. So it really does add simplicity and a level of reliability to the environment over and above just having standard standalone systems. So just lastly, with just a minute or two left before we'll open up for questions, I'll just build this slide out. I mentioned as I was talking about scalability, I'd go through some of the economical benefits of our approach. I've already mentioned how we have a scale-out architecture that allows us to scale to many different levels of capacity, but also there's some commercial benefits of that, and that gives you predictability for the future, because buying backup storage in today's world shouldn't be a 3 to 5 year consideration. You should be able to plan even longer, technology permitting, and some technologies don't allow you to plan longer because of technology obsolescence or high support costs and so on. So with ExaGrid, we make some commitments. The first commitment we make is whatever price you purchase the first appliance for, or the first appliances for, we will hold that price for the future 5 years after the initial purchase. So there's predictability for future capacity, and growth can be unpredictable. So that means that you can, if you need more capacity, or if you acquire a company, or for whatever reason, you can predict what the future capacity will cost. But more importantly, or as importantly, we also give predictability around maintenance costs. And certainly, I'm assuming many of you will have experienced unpredictable maintenance costs with some vendors, especially as technology ages to year 4, 5, or 6, and so on. So we guarantee we'll never increase the cost of support by more than 3% per year. But additionally, we commit that we will never obsolete or stop supporting a technology. So that is a situation where, and we have customers that do this already, we have customers that have equipment that's 6, 7, 8 years old, still supported, still working perfectly well for them. So it gives you the ability to choose how and when you scale, and the storage platform, you're not forced to do it by a vendor. And that is an important consideration, certainly in my view. So we said we'd leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. I see we're just coming up to 10 to the hour. Because I'm sharing my screen, I didn't actually see whether any questions were coming in. So if I just stop sharing for a moment, and before I do that, thank you all for your time today. I don't know, Caddy, have we got any questions that you can pose to either myself or Raymond that have come in from the audience?
I do see one coming in. It's just scrolling, right? So I'm seeing one right now. Shall I read it out?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just going through it. There's quite a lot of text there, so if you've got it there, that'd be great, Raymond.
Okay, I think thanks TC for the question. What are the top 3 unique points for Veeam with ExaGrid, right? So Graham, probably I'll start off with that, and let's match up and see whether your top 3 is similar to mine, right? So
absolutely, this is going to be an interesting one, Raymond.
Yep, for sure. I think there are definitely numerous of unique points, as what Graham has mentioned. The relationship with Alliance's relationship with Veeam and ExaGrid has gone a long way, right? As well as the technology integration has gone a long way, right? So if I were to pick the top 3, I would say firstly, performance. Performance has always been the key integrated objective that we are trying to do with ExaGrid from a so-called dedupe appliances standpoint, right? So performance on backup and recovery, and we have shown you quite a lot in our content with regards to that. Second will be on cost. I mean, cost is a big concern. Data is growing on the production side. Your backup data will be growing even more because you've got to keep data for compliance for years and so on, right? So keeping that cost effectively managed through the ExaGrid dedupe appliances, not compensating the performance, is also the other key objective that we are having these 2 solutions stacked together. And last but not least, the most important piece right now is secure. Very secure data that can help you against cyber threat attacks. So performance, cost, and secure, and all these 3 are interconnected, as well as it does complement each other. We're not saying that you get the cost benefits, but you don't get the performance, right? With these 2 solutions coming together, you get all 3 complementing together. Yep, Graham, you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so as I heard the question, my first thought was that's a tough one. It's a tough one because there are so many unique points, and just straight off the top of my head, I think the 3 I would identify, and I think 2 are identical to the ones you mentioned. Performance, absolutely, completely agree from a performance perspective. Cost, of course, is important in all technology decision-making processes. So cost is also one I would say. And then the integration between the 2, which comes to a number of different points. The integration in terms of scalability, in terms of the data mover, reliability, security. So pretty much, I think we're in agreement there, Raymond. Those 3 points, I think, yeah, performance, integration, and cost.
Thanks, TC, for the question. You deserve a virtual hug from both myself and Graham, because that is a good question. And do you have time for one more? I think there's one more question over here. If you're unable to answer back to your question, we definitely track that down, and then if you could drop, we do have the email, and then we'll send it across to you. So one question over here. No problem in joining late. The landing zone is immutability of storage provided by ExaGrid, or is the function of the backup software? Graham, probably I'll let you kind of take that on. Or?
Yeah, I can take that. Thank you, Raymond. So the immutability is provided by the hardware, by the ExaGrid. So the data sitting in the retention area, the deduplicated data, is immutable. And that's really important because that's another layer of protection. Veeam does a number of different things in terms of protecting itself. So in addition to what Veeam is doing for protection, we're doing something with a different layer. And I've got the view that says you can never have too many layers of protection. So the direct answer to your question is it's the hardware that's providing the immutability.
Graham, thanks for that. I'll just add on one single point over here. As I mentioned earlier on, it's definitely not a single vendor or a single player out there who's able to cater for all this immutability and cyber protection, right? It's always the complementary and leveraging on the strength of each of the vendors to get this across, right? So, yep. We do have one question over here from Donnie. Thanks, Raj, for the question, the earlier question. And Donnie is, what if ransomware has been in primary file system undetected for 100 days? For that matter, it's dormant inside there, right? I think that's what you're referring to. And then it's just waiting to be activated, right? So, Graham, you want to take that on, or you want?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question that we can both add some value to. So, if ransomware has been sitting benign in the environment, obviously it's a file that's sitting in the primary storage, and it will have been backed up. So the backup data could have that file within it. Now, that file cannot be executed in any way when it's stored in the ExaGrid system. We're just storing the data from a retention point of view. So therefore, if a ransomware event takes place and you need to recover from the backups, it's very important to scan the data as it's being recovered. I think that's probably a great segue for Raymond to go into perhaps a little bit more detail about secure restore, perhaps, Raymond.
Thank you so much, Graham. You're well familiar with our technology, and you know that this is where I'm coming from, right? So we do have a secure restore whereby we do note that there are ransomware who comes in dormant and just waiting to be attacked, right? And it's what Graham has mentioned. It got into the backup, and what happens when I need to do a recovery, when I'm being attacked, and when I recovered is a ransomware attack, and the ransomware kind of got activated, right? So what we have over here is the secure restore that Graham has mentioned. Before the recovery comes into the picture, there is this bubble data lab that is being run up just for a simplistic, from a depiction standpoint, a bubble environment with this data being run up, and we'll do a scanning inside there to ensure that it is ransomware free, is malware free, is virus free, before you restore it back into the production. All right. So as the term is, a trusted backup, a secure backup does comes with a secure restore that we are trying to do over here. Yep. So the capabilities is called secure restore, and this is in the process when you're doing the recovery where scanning comes into the picture. Hope that helps, Donnie, in answering your question, and thanks for that. Okay, Raj has a follow-up question on is it the same settings, retention, lock on the storage? I think, Graham, that's probably referring to the ExaGrid Timelock, right?
Yes. Is it the same setting? So I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me just answer it in the way I think it was meant. And if not, please do post a follow-up question. So when you configure an ExaGrid system, you set a retention time lock setting or time period in our user interface. And once that is set, all data, all backups that come into the system would adhere to the retention time lock setting enabled in the user interface. I don't know if that's answering the question, but if not, Raj, please do post a follow-up so I can just make sure I understood it.
And Desmond has a follow-up question. I think I'll take that. How should we detect in my backup being affected by ransomware? how to decide which clean restore point to be used by Veeam or ExaGrid solution, right? I think the second question is definitely a very common question. I'll just take on the first one first. How should we detect backup has been affected, right? So there are a couple of practices that can be done. We call it the sure backup, right? Which means that your backup is surely being recoverable. And when it comes to recovery, it's not just about getting the data back, it's also to be ransomware free and so on, right? So from a testing standpoint, Veeam has an automated way of running what we call sure backup to test your backup files on a regular basis. So with that testing coming in, you should have the capabilities of doing a daily automated test with reports to print out. Is this all good? Is this all clean? Is there a detection that's happening in a backup and so on, right? So I think that is something that's conscientiously that we need to do it so that we have the testing done as a proactive measures. So when it comes to a question whereby if I did not test some of the backup that's in the backup repository right now, that leads on to the second question on how do we decide the clean restore point to be used by Veeam plus ExaGrid solution, right? I think there are a couple of ways that comes into the picture. Of course, the forensic of what happens, right? When do you think the detection happens, right? From a tracking standpoint, as I shared, that weekend attacks, they know that when they come in. So roughly, you know that it's being attacked probably on Friday or on Saturday, right? So there is the point recovery, a point in time recovery that's needed from the Veeam perspective. So, but you want to make sure that the restore is clean. Bring it up as what Graham has mentioned, do a secure restore or do even a detection test on the backup before pushing it in across to the production. You will be able to know 100% which is the best point of recovery from that testing that you're doing. So hope that helps answer the question. And Shantosh has another question. Which tool or how do we perform the scan of the backup? Oh, that is inbuilt in Veeam. The secure restore that Graham has mentioned is inbuilt in Veeam. If you want to do more deeper testing, that is the sure backup that I mentioned about, right? So incorporating some script inside there, your own testing script that you're doing, that can be incorporated. Yep, Raj got a response. That's it. Thanks, Raj. And Malu, does Veeam and ExaGrid provide immutability as a combination? So Graham, you want to take that on?
Yeah, so I guess if I describe it this way, ExaGrid is storing the data in immutable fashion. And of course, I don't know how to otherwise answer the question. So it is done by ExaGrid, but the fact that the data is immutable is a combination of the fact, of course, that you're using Veeam and ExaGrid. So it's done by the hardware, or it's stored on the hardware, but the combination of the two with all of the features that we've just been talking about do give a very powerful combination of products for data protection.
Yep, Graham, I agree on that. It's definitely a combination. Obviously, we are working with a immutability vendor like ExaGrid that has gone through testing, that has gone through validation and so on, right? So from a combination or complementary standpoint of both technologies, there's definitely validation being done. And again, right, I just want to add upon that the validation is on top of the immutability. How fast can we recover with the use of immutability and so on, right? So that's also the additional validation that has been done from a combined technology standpoint. So I think we're exceeding like a minute, but Graham, I think this is a great question. Probably you can answer that as the last one. ExaGrid support WAN acceleration functionality. I think you have covered that in your slide too, right?
Yeah, so we can be very WAN efficient in terms of replication. We can achieve some significant data reduction for replication purposes. However, maybe the question means, can we work with Veeam's WAN acceleration? So if a Veeam customer wanted to use Veeam's functionality to get data offsite, it's agnostic to us. We can perfectly well work with Veeam WAN acceleration, or we are very efficient anyway if our replication is used. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, you can use both Veeam software WAN acceleration capabilities from the proxy-to-proxy communication as well as ExaGrid acceleration tools. Right?